Hi. Hi, thank you. First of all, I have to announce the disclaimer. I never drove the car of 200 kilometers on the opposite side of the road. Despite it was true, I had a numbered car when I was in the office in the Central Bank. But maybe some of you know that roughly 5 years ago, Andrei Kozlov, my friend in the Central Bank, was killed. He was the deputy governor of the Central Bank. So it's not your goodwill, you're not an oligarch, if you're a state official manager, you can drive an armored car, it's safe. Nevertheless, it is an investor day, and I was really surprised that you start your debates, you start your analysis with political problems in Russia. Moreover, Johan asked me to discuss or to debate with you political problems, though I never was a politician. I'm a professional economist. I spent a lot of time in the Ministry of Finance, in the Central Bank, in the private business, in the international business. I was never a politician, I was never elected to the parliament, so it was not my role. I never was a political expert. And we start an investor day with discussing political issues in the country where the last 12 years you can hear about political stability, that nothing can change in this country. And some of you who are watching more closely events in Russian politics, yesterday you had a lot of news about one of 7 Russian parties, the Pravaya Delo, right business percent, and that indicated clearly that nothing unpredictable, nothing occasionally can happen in the Russian political system. All is under control of the Kremlin. So it is full stability, like in the Soviet Union time. And so, what is the reason to discuss? Of course, we have elections to the Duma, to the parliament, 3 months in front of us. We have elections of the president 6 months in the beginning of March. Nevertheless, everyone knows the outcome of those elections. Everyone knows that if 4 years ago the ruling party, United Russia, has got 64%, this year it should get 65%, because the results should be better. And it is likely in the German Democratic Republic, where there were, if I remember correctly, there were 6 parties, and one of them, Socialist Union Party, should win any elections with 70–75% of votes. So it's precisely the same. We have a ruling party that will obtain 65% of votes, and maybe 2 or 3 other parties will get the rest in the parliament. Yes, we have elections of the president, but we will know who is our next president not in March. We will know this in mid-December, as soon as two real voters in those elections, Mr. Putin and Mr. Medvedev, will decide who of 2 candidates, Putin and Medvedev, will run for the presidency. As they decide who is the candidate, he is the winner. So why to discuss politics? What is the miracle in the Russian political life today? But it seems to me the organizers of this event were quite true. Russian economy, despite all attractiveness to foreign investors, to portfolio investors, it seems to me is in a depressed mood. After crisis, growth is not stable. Definitely Russia is not able to demonstrate, Russian economy is not able to demonstrate 6–7% of growth. The government speaks about 4% this year, but the last quarter was a small decline. The previous quarter was much slower than 4%, and the outcome for this year may be 3.5 to 3.7%. And investment in the economy, direct investment, Russian or international, they're not growing. Capital is flying out of the country. Why? If you ask any expert in Russia, any expert in the economic field, he will tell you that the crucial problem for Russian economic recovery, for Russian economy, all problems are political. Russia needs to fight corruption. Russia needs to implement rule of law. Russia needs to impose, to implement, to introduce, and to establish the proper government system, the proper bureaucracy. Russia needs to find the state rating. Russia should improve the investment climate for direct investment. Because of course portfolio investment is great, and each of us can benefit from that. But economy cannot benefit from portfolio investment. And economy needs direct investment, and they are not going to the country. And as I have told about the problems, all of those problems, corruption, rule of law, etc., they are political problems. They are not economical problems. You cannot do anything in the economy if you have obstacles that I have mentioned. You cannot, even you are the best businessman in the world. I don't know if you are Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or Sergey Brin or Larry Page, it doesn't matter. If you have corruption, if you have no rule of law, you cannot run business in this country. And that's why political issues, political forecast, political is the most important at the moment. What are my personal views? First of all, I will not forecast. I cannot foresee the future. And in my mind, anyone who will tell you I know the future, he is lying. He is definitely lying. No one knows the future of Russia. Russia even doesn't know its past. And there is a well-known phrase that Russia has unpredictable history. And of course, Russia has unpredictable future. Why I do not want even to try to forecast? First of all, we have for 12 years we have a strong national leader, Mr. Putin. He had 2 presidential terms being in the office and 1 term as a prime minister, but still he is the leader of the country. And often you may hear that Mr. Medvedev serves as the president while Mr. Putin is the leader. And each of these 3 terms of Mr. Putin, they were different one from another. No one next term was like the previous one. And that's why my anticipation that the next 4, 5, 6 years of Mr. Putin, they will be different. And no one will predict what will be the change in his policy. Second, despite there are only 2 candidates for being the president, Putin and Medvedev, in any event, we should face the significant reshuffling of personalities in Russian political arena. I think that even if Medvedev is a president, there will be a new prime minister. And if there is a new prime minister and Medvedev is a president, who is Mr. Putin? If Putin is a president, who is a prime minister? But there are some vacancies that will emerge in the government and so on. In my view that many people which will change their positions in economic field, in legal system of the government or of the country, and a lot depends on who is on which position, and a lot depends on personalities in any country, Russia, of course, as well. And that's why I think that the biggest debates in the Russian ruling class, ruling elite at the moment, is not who is the president, Putin or Medvedev. It is not so difficult to answer. The most difficult is how to move all figures, how to make everyone happy, how to reach consensus with this ruling elite in order not them to fight during the next period. Next story is maybe even more a strategic one. Russia is not a democratic country, it's not a democratic society. Despite we have a president, despite we have a parliament, despite we have the political parties, Russia has a very specific regime, political regime. And those of you who remember the world's history of the 1980s, 1970s, may remind political regimes that were called junta in the Latin America. Of course, the Russian regime is not as cruel. Russian regime is not as much blood on his hands. Finally, Russian regime is more or less liberal because except of prohibition to vote, prohibition to participate in the political life, all other human rights are in place. Russian people, it would be lying if I say that there was any other period in the life of Russian where Russian citizens lived better than today. Really, living standards are the highest in Russian history. Russians can travel all over the world with no problems, with no obstacles. So only one small area that is closed for everyone. It is political life. It is participation in the deciding who will rule the country, and that is the key feature of the Russian regime, of the Russian political regime. The current group of people doesn't want and does not anticipate to give up the power. And that is the basic pillar of the system. That all what they have done in transforming electoral legislation, in transforming the course legislation, etc., is done in order to be able to keep the power forever and do not allow to anyone to go to courts or to any other place, to security agencies, just to even to have a minor chance, even have a minor chance to overcome the ruling group. But there is one small problem. All this system that seems to be really strong, and really I do not see any political opponent, any inside the country to this system is based on only one person. This person, the name of this person is Vladimir Putin. And definitely he is not eternal. He cannot live forever. And as usually, if you look in the world history, in the history of juntas in different countries of the world, regimes that are based on a single person, they are not stable. As soon as a person disappears for any reason, regime collapses. And I think that historically, Vladimir Putin faces a much more significant choice right at the moment. Rather than to decide who will be the next president, he has to decide, will he establish any rules within this regime? Will he establish a rule, for example, like in China, or like in Mexico in the previous 75 years, when there was a rule in the Constitutional Revolutionary Party, where there was a rule that every 7 years there should be a new president. Only one term, or in China when the ruling team has 10 years and they have to leave. If he establishes a rule, if he leaves the power position, that means that this current regime will have some rules replacing the leader. If not, if he decides to be a president, that means that there are no rules how to change the leader of the regime. And strategically, that will be the biggest problem for the country for coming years. Because Vladimir Putin is 59 this year. He will be 16 when he will be president once more time. He will be 72 when his other 2 terms will expire. He will be 78 on the 3rd term. What's further on? And that is the biggest miracle of Russian political life. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. These two guys have been talking about politics, so I guess I have to talk about economy. Speaking seriously, I would say to Sergey, you shouldn't be worried that Putin in some future day might turn 72. Konrad Adenauer, when he became chancellor in 1949, was 74 years old, and he stayed until 62. So, and I think there is consensus in Germany that most of this was a good experience for us. The subject of our session is Russia at crossroads again, question mark. And we have heard maybe a political analysis of an approach to an answer to this question. I suggest to you that the recent crisis has been a very serious wake-up call for the Russian leadership, whether they liked it or not. And what shocked them in particular was that in the community of BRIC states, they were by far the worst. In fact, some people talked about kicking them out of that group because they were doing so poorly. The key message, and I think it is understood, of the crisis is the main drivers of Russian growth are not under Russian control. Number one, the price of oil and other commodities, and secondly, the cost of capital. Capital and commodities were the driver the drivers of Russian growth. So the system is inherently unstable and vulnerable. Now, it is true, this issue of Crossroads is normally understood to be directed at the future leadership, who will be president. That is an important question, but it is not as important in terms of economy. Because when you look at what the two contenders say, and what the papers say of people who are working for them, the main direction of thinking and of promised action is pretty identical. One may be talking more about liberalization of the political system, the other one may be talking more about social stability, social justice and stability. But that's a different way of presenting more or less the same message. So a lot of all this is perceptions. You may have seen a very, very interesting new book on the market, the title On China by Henry Kissinger. I saw him last week. We talked a lot about China and about Russia. And he said he had been on more than 30 television shows in the United States because of his book. Many call in, and he did not get one single question in the United States on China which was friendly. Now, I've been wondering what questions he would have gotten had he written a book on Russia. So much about perceptions. But let us take it a little bit further. And he said the same thing. Everybody in the business community of the West is absolutely convinced he's got to be in China. So why is the view of the international business community very different on Russia? You've heard some of the answers. Is Russia a place one should be in? As far as the German business community is concerned, Germany is Russia's foreign business partner number one. The answer is yes. You should be in Russia. You should be conscious of all the difficulties, due diligence in every respect of the word, not only thoroughly, but extremely thoroughly. That is absolutely necessary. But then you probably stand a good chance to do good business and make good money. And Russia is one of the few European markets with real growth potential. And this doesn't only go for the big companies. It goes for small and medium-sized companies. I think German companies are numbering now 4,600 in this country, which is quite a lot. So there may be two dozen big companies. This is from the FDI point, foreign direct investment point of view. The portfolio is a slightly different matter, but grosso modo, it goes in the same direction. Now, is Russia not made for democracy? Is Russia not made for market economy? Is it not in the genes of the Russians? I think this is a pretty superficial question. And I would agree with Sergey when he says today Russians as individuals have never in history been as free If they can afford it, they can travel. And as a percentage of population, more Russians hold passports which allow them to go abroad than Americans. More Russians go to study abroad today than Americans. Now, you can say that this is not due to what I am trying to indicate. It is due to the quality of the educational system, and there is some truth in that. Nevertheless, these 11+ million Russians who hold passports are traveling. Many of them have plugged into the Western life. They have houses abroad, they have holiday homes abroad, families abroad, their banking accounts are abroad, and they appreciate a different environment to live in. The real issue is whether the Russian population at large is allowed to plug into this Western way of life. And I think it is a process which is evolving. And one of the signals we get, for example, is, since Jochen mentioned European Union, that in legislating on matters of economy, Russian officials are obliged to look at European Union legislation in order to ensure, to the extent possible, if it's compatible with Russian interests, that things go in the same direction. So, since the European Union market is more than 50% for Russian exports, this is very logical and a good policy. Now, as far as democracy and market economy are concerned, I'll give you two examples of why I think there is positive movement. One is the car industry. This year, for the first time, more foreign brand cars are sold in Russia than Russian cars. So you have a democracy of the consumer. Whoever can afford it buys foreign brand. Second example, agriculture. I remember the days when the Russians were fighting starvation by importing grain from Canada and the United States. In fact, there was a summit meeting in Cancun, the first one where Reagan attended as president. He had just been elected and he was going to lift the grain embargo on the Soviet Union, which Carter had imposed. We thought it was wrong to impose the grain embargo, but it was equally wrong now to raise it without any other reason than a campaign promise to American farmers. And we thought hard, how do you explain to Reagan that that is wrong? We came up with the following thing. A question to Radio Yerevan. Is it possible that the United States turn communist? Answer. In principle, yes, but who will provide grain for the Soviet Union? So today, when farming in Russia is more or less privatized, and they are producing grain like a good capitalist agricultural industry and exporting it. So these were the two examples I wanted to give you. And there is a very impressive program of privatization in the pipeline, including companies like Rosneft, which will be privatized 100%. Aeroflot and many others. But I come back to my initial point. Russia is not the island of stability in a very unpredictable world it would like to be. Beginning of the last crisis, they thought they were. They are not. So I will wind up by saying, sort of connecting political and economic. It may be important who will be next president. It will be important. But the real question is, will in the near future, which means 2011, 12, 13, not later than that, will Russia overcome the present stagnation? That, in my mind, is the real and key point. And overcoming stagnation to do what? To reduce the dependence on growth drivers which are not under control of the country. Introduce innovation. improve the infrastructure, improve the investment climate, all these things. So the jury is out, but let's hope for the best. Thank you.
Comment on two aspects. One is the level and the future of education in Russia. What are the trends? We are somewhat worried that the quality of Russian education, which used to be very good, is deteriorating because the state is not committing enough resources to this sector. And the second question is, do you see any tendencies of decentralizing the country? I think long term, it is one of the weaknesses of Russia that all power is concentrated not only in a small elite, but also geographically. I mean, all successful countries like the United States or Germany are decentralized. They have various centers of power. Like in Germany, it's Frankfurt or Hamburg or Munich or Berlin, or in the US, you have Houston, San Francisco, New York, Washington. So, but in Russia, it's all Moscow, right? So the political power is concentrated in Moscow, and also the economic power. You know, do you see any tendency that this will change? So two questions: education and centralization.
Thank you, Dieter, for those nice questions. Although the second, I will start with the second. It's shorter. Definitely, I do not see those tendencies. There is a certain, there are certain debates, discussions within the expert community that there is a need to decentralize decision making, to decentralize fiscal authority, to decentralize expenditure management, but mostly to the local level rather than to regional level. Though no real federation. I would say that Russia is more and more becoming a unitarian state, like France, for example, yeah, where all mayors, they are nominated by the president. So Russia is virtually the same. Today we have no elections of the governors, regional governors. In more than 80% of Russian cities with population above 100,000 inhabitants, we have no elections of mayors. So it's a unitarian state. But saying that, I would remind you that in the time of the Soviet Union, there was no decentralization tendencies until maybe 1989. And there was definitely no decentralization tendencies in Caucasian republics or Ukraine or Central Asia until maybe mid-1991. And suddenly the country collapsed. I think that if political changes are not that are not based on the election process, because I do not believe that Russian power can be changed as a result of elections. I more rely on unpredictable changes. As soon as unpredictable changes will emerge in Russia, of course, decentralization will be one of the topics. On education, unfortunately, I have to support negative views. In my mind, it is not only the question of lack of financing or small financing. I have three sons, two of them 21 and 25. The eldest graduated in UK, the second he is now in US in the university. And in Moscow they were in the school with a so-called international baccalaureate system. That is international standards for education. And according to Russian laws, in the school, it was obligatory to have Russian standards and international standards. It was not possible to run only international standards. And I spent a lot of time understanding the difference. And I would say that is a methodological difference. Russia has underinvested in infrastructure for many decades. And definitely education is one of the infrastructural branches. methodology of education in Russia today, despite is it a primary school, secondary school, or university, is based on the Soviet standards. You have to learn what? The current education in the world is based on the principle you have to learn how. That is the basic difference. And you cannot shift from one system to another within 1 year or 10 years. You have to start to prepare new teachers, new professors. And it is a great, great problem. And unfortunately, it is, in my view, it has not even been seriously debated. At the moment, one of my positions is in one of the best Russian universities that is called High School of Economics. And I have to say honestly that the level of our students is rather low, despite that is the best university in many areas. And what is more frightening me, students don't want to invest their time in education. Starting from the second or third year, they are looking to get interim positions in banks and insurance companies somewhere else. And as they get those positions, education for them becomes a second tier, third tier problem. They don't want even to visit university if they have good interim job positions. That is really, really a huge problem.
Hi, good morning. David Rosenberg from Just Greens. Building on the comment about stagnation, what's the two things? What's the borrowing environment like in Russia for businesses to borrow and capitalize and grow? And any comments about stimulating the economy? What from the federal level is going on to stimulate business?
On the terms of borrowing, I think it seems to be that there are plenty of opportunities for short-term borrowings in Russia, while historically in Russia there is no long-term savings. All pension savings they are managed by the government, by the National Bank, that is the special state corporation, and that's usually a problem. That's why Russian companies and financial sector, they're so active abroad, because they cannot borrow for long terms here in the country if you are not state company. On the second issue, let me think of it. Okay.
I try to follow thinking in Russia. And there are those who believe that whether Russia wants to join the European Union or not, it would be very wise to try to get ready for joining. In the sense, other countries who wanted to join had to adapt to the acquis of the European Union, the rules. That created the basis for becoming competitive in a systemic way. Now, there are others who don't believe in that. But I find it very interesting that there is a strong school of thinking that Russia should do step number one of further integration into the international economy and community by joining WTO. That would be stage one of a missile of integration, and stage two would be much closer relations with the European Union. Now, that's another question, is there a unified view on the side of the European Union on future shape of relations with Russia? I think on energy there is a principle we need it. Beyond that, I think there are a number of different views. For example, in the case of Germany, we started very early, more than 30 years ago, during the Cold War, the pipeline gas agreement, which led to profound and very antagonizing conflict inside NATO. You, the Germans, are going to be dependent, and they will blackmail you into leaving the consensus of NATO countries. Well, actually, it did not happen. And it turned out to be a mutual dependence, them on money and us on energy. And in the last crisis, again, it became evident that the dependence on money and foreign capital was very, very visible, and Russia was very vulnerable. So there is no EU energy policy as far as Russia is concerned, which I would call a profound and sustainable consensus, a sense of direction. In the larger context of relations, NATO decided last year, after a profound examination, on a new strategy, a new strategic concept at the summit in Lisbon in November. I was a member of the 12 men and women group who prepared the strategy, and one of the real points of contention was relations with Russia. In the beginning, in particular, the so-called new members of NATO, which means Central Eastern European states, asked for active reassurance against what gas. So we need pre-positioning of military equipment further to the east, we need more exercise, we need more contingency plans. And as we went through all the questions which have to be considered, including the global shift of power, we arrived at a different answer, which was not unconditionally, but in principle, at all levels of NATO activities, the door is open for cooperation. So the short answer to Jochen's question is, on both EU and NATO, on the Western side, there is a general disposition for cooperation, and maybe if Russia wants one day membership, but we have to go step by step.
Just a very short answer. At the moment, Russia has a very specific anti-crisis support, increase in social payroll taxes. But nevertheless, in the budget, there are some specific long-term, historically, maybe 5-6 years programs supporting agriculture and export of non-raw materials goods.